chair a question and answer session, so we will do that, and there's one or two things we might want to point our way towards. I mean, I found the morning really illuminating, and a real slap just to remind me, you know, the Graeae presentation and sorry, just what's happening. And I'm going to chuck in, I'm somebody who acquired impairments when I was 18, and they said, what do you want to do? What did you want to do? I said, I want to be an actor. And they went, And they said, they were really specific about it. They said, you are going to be a radio operator for the police. And there's been many moments in my working life when I've regretted not going down that path. But not, you know, in the talk, this is what's happening to lives at the moment. And it is funny, and it is absurd, and it is cruel, and it is immoral, and it is economically wrong. So it's good to have that, you know, and Richard going through, just reminding us of that weight of history. It feels at the moment that we are at a tipping point in terms of putting deaf and disabled people, I'm talking particularly in terms of integration, into plays. My last 2 trips to the theatre have been to the Globe to see Imogen, which had a deaf actor in the cast. One of the strengths of the production, totally enjoyed that, worked very well. Then going to go and see, what's the play called? With Jamie Bedard. Oh, that one, yeah. The So, seeing Jamie in a role at the Threepenny Opera, we just gave it much, you know, Jamie, apart from being very good in the role, it just gave it extra bites, it worked really well. Suddenly the world looked that much more real. So, you know, both very good examples. Do we have any questions? Or points? Or criticisms?
Can I just say something? That the reason we did sorry is not all doom and gloom, but just to reinforce how utterly important it is that we are doing theatre. Theatre is the best thing in the world for challenge perception, changing heart and minds. So we're all in it together. So the more that we do as theatre practitioners about inclusion, like ramps and more, it makes our fight easier because we have real allies. So that's why
Yes.
we did that, to say, next up is more theatre.
Yes, quite a few of us are involved with Act for Change as well, which is a much more inclusive thing about integration. So whether it's on ethnicity and gender and age, and that's been a really good thing to be part of. And because you're also concentrating on one neglected community, doesn't mean you have to suddenly forget everything else. They are very important, and they must always be at the top of your mind. You know, and I know we have some actors here, like Dennis Parney and things, who might want to join in and talk about his experience. You might.
Yeah.
Opportunity, I suppose. I often find that when we are talking about traditional, what's the word? Traditional storylines, if you like. So the way that we access the sort of human condition through all of these very traditional, often, you know, they said there are only 32 stories in all of the sort of canon stories that you can tell. They're all based on 32 basic stories, which are Greek, I suppose. But as we've sort of gone through time, it seems that most of those stories are in some way offensive to someone. So my question is that if we are essentially trying to sort of use, I suppose it's easier in theatre, but it's much harder in TV and film. In TV and film, we tend to work on the stereotypes are even bolder in a sense, and less caring. So if we are to sort of try and, you know, change things how do we do that without making sort of choices that are not necessarily, because I mean those traditions are there for a reason, I suppose. And so it's how to sort of give people something different, whilst also respecting traditions that are useful and getting rid of ones that aren't. Do you see what I mean? But those traditions they become a fabric of how we understand genre, for example. Is very they're sort of very infused, and how do you sort of tear them apart? I suppose.
Does anybody want to respond to that?
I thought there were 7 stories.
Maybe 7 stories, and then they sort of turn into 32 bad versions. Of right. Okay. I'm not a writer. I'm just.
Yeah. No. I think that is a really interesting point, and I think there are stories that perhaps offend now, and stories that need to be readdressed, and I think that's what theatre maybe is good at, is actually taking things and turning them on their head and exploring them and putting them in new clothes. And I think some of the examples of the plays that we've seen excerpts from today have done that really successfully. I don't know, Richard, what your perspective on that would be?
I think the human condition is a human condition, and we're not going to change it. That it would be ridiculous to say that we're all the same, because we're not. It's our diversity that's important, and therefore it's how we approach that diversity that's important. What I was trying to do in my presentation is say, yes, we have this diversity, but does it always have to be seen through the lens of negativity? And I think that's where change can take place, by reversing roles, all the sorts of things people do. And my feeling is in theatre, it's easier to do than in big productions for film and TV. Although, interestingly enough, you were at the event last year, we did it at the BFI, we did come up with quite a lot of examples, and you were as well, of where things are shifting. And outside, with the exception of what we've just been talking about in the last year or so, theatre seems to have got stuck into very much the the Graeae, the definitely and so on. They're doing disability, and then other people are doing something else. And when we set up today, we thought we have to break out of that. And it's good that at the time, since we were talking about it since January, at the same time we've been doing that, it seems to be happening as well. But I suppose what we'd like to see is much more experiment and different ways of doing it. It's not for a pundit like me, if you like, to say this is how you do it. What we're saying is this is the problematic. Now how are you creatively going to actually deal with this in a lot of different ways? And it seems to me there are many more ways that it can be dealt with than we've actually come across so far. And that might be the exciting thing about it, the sort of spirit that Ewan was talking about on the government inspector. It would be nice to see that happening on a lot of different sorts of drama pieces. And of course, why I think it's so important for theatre, particularly both established theatres but also smaller community and fringe theatres, is that they can experiment and they can do these things in a way that perhaps a bigger theatre organisation finds it more difficult to do. And so we're sort of putting it out there. We don't have all the answers. But it seems to me there are some ingredients that are important to respect the views of disabled people and have them as part of the process, both as actors but also on the production side. So bringing in assistant producers, maybe someone shadowing on the script or even doing the script, so that there are people bringing in their perspective on it. Because I think that's the way we're going to build on the experience of disabled people, bringing it in. And it can be turned around. We can have the theatre, so we can do all sorts of things. But it's a rich vein which we need to alert our audiences to, and to jolt them out of complacency, which the mass media create, really. They create, we are having people killing themselves every week because the benefits are being taken away. You hardly ever see any focus on that, and I'm not saying we should focus on that solely, but that's just one way that people are lulled, and the theatre surely is part of our political environment, is to enliven people's intellect so that they ask questions and challenge, and that's what we need to be able to do.
I think the thing about making mistakes, or you mentioned sort of trying things, I think that's really important, because in theatre that's what we do all the time, and the best theatre is created when you take away the onus to have a really, really good end product, and you try and get the process right, and you think, shit, we're going to take a risk and try this and this and this. And then, 9 times out of 10 it might not work, but that one time you've got the real gem. And I think the same is true here, where actually, but perhaps because there's a lack of knowledge, there's then a fear of, oh, actually, if we engage with this, do we have to do this way, this way, this way? And actually, it's good to hear the sense of just try and do something and engage, and it doesn't matter if you fuck it up or get it a bit wrong.
Yeah, when we had the Invisible Children conference that Richard put a picture up of earlier, which was 1995, a lot of mainstream directors, producers and actors and writers came to it, and they all said they thought about race, sex, class, everything. They all admitted they never thought about disability. That was 1995, and they weren't sure how to do it. And then we started the campaign called the 1 in 8, which Ewan was involved in, and other people here, which was to change the mainstream media for everybody. And a friend of ours, Alan Cumming, went to be in a play, and he said, why can't we have a wheelchair user in that part? And the director said, well, there'll be a fire risk. That was in the 90s, so we've improved slightly, haven't we? Not a lot. And I think it's really good having Danny here, because Danny, when he spoke at our BFI event last year, was talking about a bit about being a black actor, basically. I think you were, and the complexity of that. But you have managed to be a formidable black actor on the mainstream stage, doing parts that aren't just for a black person, I think you would say. Which is all you ever wanted, wasn't it? Was that disabled people could be in any part. They didn't have to be just a disabled character. So, I don't know what I'm saying really, I'm just saying I think it's improved a bit, but it's still incredible that that same list of stereotypes was drawn up. We were looking at in the early 90s, and it's now 2016.
I think it needs to be reminded that disability is not white middle class. Disability is across ages, everything.
Just quickly before I come to you, this sort of being offensive is also, and who's sort of exploring certain material, is cultural and changes, doesn't it, through time? It's kind of fluid sort of process.
Yeah, I suppose. I mean, I can, from an experience of an actor, of my background, that often being part of the mainstream means that you are performing to people who are not like you, and so, and that's essentially commercial theatre, but it does sort of bleed into what we like to think of as the more subsidised or experimental theatre. And so, the question of why there are not more black plays being put on in theatres, whether we should have, theatres that's focused just on black plays, it's all about access. It's about whether there's an audience for that. Will it make any money? All of these questions that sort of limit what we do creatively to being able to, put bums on seats, make money, appeal to the mainstream, whoever they are. These are problems that I've had to challenge. I've had to face it as an actor, from training to the present day, and some of those problems are ongoing, and some of them have sort of been vastly improved. So it's this mainstream. I don't know who this mainstream are actually, and actually I think theatre and storytelling should be available to everybody, and when it is, then obviously I think that that is a way to challenge is by creating an audience for it. But sometimes that's not as easy as it seems.
Lady up there.
Hello, my name's Kate. I'm agent for Change.
Oh, sorry, Kate, you recognise it.
That's all right. I was just wanting to make two comments for things to bear in mind. I spoke at Unlimited Festival about being a young disabled artist, flattered to still be called young at 31, just but actually I talked about being younger than I am now, and it took me a long time to identify as a disabled person. I have chronic mental illness. I was always inspired by companies like Graeae, and definitely after I started to learn about social model, I thought, oh, I am disabled, oh my God. And actually it really, really empowered me. And I was interested to find at Unlimited that there are other young disabled artists with all different impairments, and disabled is a bit of a dirty word, and they didn't really want to connect to it. And I think that comes from the media stuff that Richard was talking about. So I just wanted to encourage us all to keep talking to especially younger people who might not yet be identifying, and remind them that it's an empowering word. It changed my life to identify in that way. And also a challenge for all of us as well is that I suppose I'm bound to bang this strong because I do have invisible impairment myself. But just to bear in mind that we're part of the conversation, and that you might cast someone with visible impairment in a production and maybe the audience can't see straight away, but you know you've got you know you've made those reasonable adjustments. And to encourage as well, because if you need to ask for a job share or an acting role, it's quite a frightening thing to do, it's so competitive. Or any kind of role, you might need reduced working hours or a different way of working. Just to keep putting it out there that that's okay to do, as well as needing an interpreter and all these other things. But they're less visible, so that's why I'm voicing it.
I was just going to pick up on something that Danny said, which I think is really interesting, and it picks up on Jess's opening speech, which for us at the park, it's the idea that we want to see the world represented on the stage and off. So for us, it's a very symbiotic thing that if you encourage the employment of black actors, disabled actors, those with invisible impairments, that you hopefully start to, people in your audiences start to recognise that those people are on your stages. So of course we're now programming accessible performances, which is brilliant, because that brings those audiences into the theatre. But we also want them to recognise that people like them can be seen as part of an ongoing programme of work, that they're on there, they can be in every performance. If they want to come to a normal performance, they can. And if they come to one of our accessible performances, when they come, they see people like them on the stage. Now, for a small theatre like us, or indeed for any theatre, that's really hard to keep delivering, but it's a great aspiration to have, and I think it addresses some of the things you were saying, because undoubtedly we have had productions here that have attracted a higher percentage of black audiences or a higher percentage of Asian audiences, and that's great. But we'd love to think that those people would continue to come and see the work, and so that's part of that process.
Go on, Jamie.
Disability with a natural rather to me my disability is an important reality. What you mentioned earlier about natural of vehicle disability in terms of natural rather than embodied reality. I've been in the natural of the workshop in the last 6 months. I have thought I've been disabled. It's been the only time in my working life that I've been an actor. And I haven't been thinking I've been disabled. And that's been really lovely. But of course I am disabled. But as long as we look the magical rather than positive reality with getting wrong, in my opinion.
Sorry.
I've just sort of got an open question really, but I think it, picking up on a similar theme, is we've heard about both the value of things being completely sort of integrated and sort of difference being entirely normalised, but also the value of making disability themes in the work part of the artistic vision, because that's a strength to be exploited. I just wonder what observations there might be about whether that's a contextual thing, whether there's a tipping point where one becomes more normal than the other. Is the question clear? Sorry.
No, it's not for me, so.
So we've heard about, from Graeae, that it's good to, if you're using difference within the piece, to make a feature of that as part of the artistic message and see that as a strength. But then we've also heard that it's good to just cast people confident that their ability makes them good for the role in any context. And I just wonder what people's experiences are of what either approach.
I mean, the absolute few, well, quick, when I was at Graeae, I was asked a question quite quickly on a radio program when we were selling a show. It said, if you are very successful as a company, will you not exist? Will you go out of business? And I said, yeah, that would be great. And then I walked away and I regretted my answer, because I thought there'll always be like-minded people who want to explore certain themes and topics. But undoubtedly, for me personally, the way forward is, if I open any script, whether that's in TV or theatre, there are a myriad of roles that could be played by a deaf or disabled actor. It's not thematic or something, like in Throat Me Opera at the National, or at Imogen, just using two examples I've seen in the last couple of weeks. And that, to me, is the future, just opening up the mindset to saying, here are some extremely good actors, we want to put them in the production. When I was talking about using impediment in particular, I was specifically focusing on the access around that, but I suppose it is very linked. Does anyone either of you two want to respond to that point, or Jamie's point?
I'm not sure that we've got enough experience really to be able to respond to that, but I mean, from a sort of philosophical standpoint, I guess the idea ultimately is that like what was termed colourblind casting, it becomes more standard that firstly, where there are roles played by, where there are roles for characters with disabilities, that they're obviously played by actors with disabilities, but secondly, the whole thing, sort of colourblind casting of actually, like you said, maybe you have Richard III, but you have the Queen who's in a wheelchair or something like that, but it's not a thing that she's in a wheelchair, it just so happens because that's a really good actor and you want to work with her. So I think that's, I don't know, that's my impression of maybe where we are looking to be heading, but maybe, I don't know.
No. Well, completely. I want to white little glass perception living in London. My disability my defining characteristic, of course, our identities are a lot more complex. Yeah.
Sorry, ladies at the back.
My name's Frankie, I'm the General Manager of Definitely, for anyone that doesn't know me, hello. I really enjoyed this morning, and it's picking up maybe on a bit of what Jamie was saying earlier, but just about, for Definitely, and I know Jenny won't mind me saying this for Graeae as well, wouldn't we love there not to need to be a Definitely or a Graeae, and that it is all inclusive and everyone, that's the ideal, everyone does this anyway, all producers, all directors, all venues. That's the end goal and the vision, I think you were talking about a little bit earlier. And it's not, just to answer a bit about your point, from my point of view, the guys and the actors that I'm working with, We are deaf-led, so it's more deaf than disabled, but I would just say, especially for definitely shows, and you saw a couple of the clips, and we had the park here with we had Grounded last year. We don't cast people just because they're deaf or disabled. First and foremost, they want to be an actor and a great actor, and that's the reason they get the role. So it's not, oh, let's put on a show and let's put a disabled or a deaf actor in that role because we think that would be great and it would tick the box of the Arts Council or whatever. It's actually, are they right for that role? No deaf or disabled actor that I know wants to be cast just because of something that doesn't, make them who they are. That's all I would say.
Kerry, then.
Hi, I'm Kerry. I'm Stratford East. I think I always want there to be a Graeae, or definitely, because I always want there to be space within the ecology for an artist to say, I'm going to lead on what makes me different. There will be some theatre companies that want to be black theatre companies. There will be some theatre companies that want to be theatre companies that happen to do black work. And I think the same has to go for disability. I think the notion of colourblind casting is a slightly dangerous one, but I think what makes people different is what needs to be celebrated. And if you look at racism in our society, one of the issues around racism is that someone of colour is invisible. They don't get the taxi, they don't get served at the bar, they don't become part of the environment. And I think we've got to allow companies and individuals to celebrate their difference and make that the norm.
Vicky.
Yeah, I think picking up from Richard's brilliant presentation and also what Kerry's saying, for me it's really important that we interrogate the sort of historical narrative of story and of character. And yes, it's really important that where those plays still exist, that they are accessible, that they represent the diversity of the world that we live in, etc. But actually one of the things that's so exciting about the work that Jenny's always made, and definitely as well, is that what they're bringing about is new forms of theatre that aren't the same old delete shit that everyone's been doing for years. And theatre is really trying to catch up with the aesthetic that Jenny and Graeae started, which is, words on stage, multi-stranded narratives. We now live in a kind of social media world, which we weren't even close to when Graeae started making that work, and we're much better at reading 5 things at once on stage rather than, a single white man giving a speech. So for me, the thing that's really exciting, and it's something that really happened a lot in Scotland, I feel, was that it's about what the new forms of theatre that we can all be part of, that can be led by the needs and the challenges and the joys of disabled and deaf and disabled community. I think that's the focus for me, new forms.
As a white man who does find it quite difficult to read 5 things going on at the same time, I just wanted to comment in all seriousness. Something that came up in watching Ramp's brilliant government inspector. It was one of the best productions I saw in the last year. Saw it at your gaff. Good. Coming in. Always do. One of the great things, though, was that, and I only found this out by accident, was that Ramps on the Moon had also got the budget together, and much of what we're talking about today depends on budget. There's no doubt. You can't get these companies together, you can't commission this work, you can't deliver the access without the budget. And a lot of what we should be talking about isn't just the impetus to need to want to do it, but how the hell do you get a budget? And the reason I'm talking about that is that hidden from me, and I think, I'm afraid to say hidden from your staff, was the fact that Ramps had paid to get a travelling loop system, a brand new Sennheiser kit that was astonishing, but it only came when I asked for it. When I asked for it, they came out with a flight case the size of the planet to read it out for me, but only because someone was prompted by it. There was no kind of, this is here, anyone can use it, you don't have to be deaf, you can have these bits and pieces. And there is still that kind of invisibility about things, at the point of sale, if you like. I mean, how many people here have actually used a loop system to enhance the experience in theatre so that you can hear things? How many people go to captions because they know that actually they're going to be right at the back, they're not going to hear, and they're going to use that kind of thing. I'm segueing into something else, which I think Richard was talking about. Sorry, I'm Richard Lee, I'm chair of Stage Text. I have a vested interest in captioning. Basically, most of the time I go to theatre and I can't hear it. It's vital to me, and it's a connection. But the number of times I come out in an interval, and you get people speaking, and I can hear them if they're near me, going, "Oh, that was so useful, wasn't it?" And I engage in a little bit of conversation because I'm very proud of the captioning. And they go, "Oh, it's very useful. I always bring my husband to this." Well, of course, I'm not disabled. And there's always that notion that this ability to connect through assistive technologies is nothing to do with the D word. Oh, I'm not deaf. Oh, I'm not disabled. I hear that so much. And I don't think it's a bad thing or an ironic thing. I think it is the sort of the mess we've got ourselves into about how we actually think of ourselves in society, or let's be a little bit more precious, how we think of ourselves in and around theatre. That's really quite important. We're a very small world, but we do have the ability to hold a magnifying glass over the whole world. So I think it's kind of important about how we perceive ourselves. Okay? And can I just say one more thing, one final thing, which is, Jen's heard this one before, but when I had this whole fuss with a director who wasn't providing, the house wasn't providing any access, the director went away and said, "I'll find out for you." And I saw him a couple of weeks later, and he smacked his head. He said, "I can't believe it, Richard. Everybody just rolled their eyes when I mentioned access. They found it tiresome and such like. You're not disabled, theatre's disabled you." And I always raise this at this sort of conference because essentially that is the problem for us, that we have to make the things that we work in and the things that we love stop disabling people.
Okay, thank you very much for that. We're going to break for lunch now because there's an hour after lunch to get in as well. Thank you.